At dawn, they came to collect Clara Whitmore's bones. That was what Captain Hale told himself as he climbed the frozen steps beneath Frostvale Citadel, one gloved hand wrapped around a ring of iron keys and the other resting on the silver latch of his lantern. Behind him, the royal council followed in stiff silence, their black cloaks snapping in the northern wind, their faces pale beneath the first gray light of morning. No one spoke her name with pity. Not Lady Cassandra Vale, who had watched Clara dragged away the night before with a smile hidden behind white lace gloves. Not Elder Damon Vale, who had called her a thief before the entire tribute hall. Not the priests who had whispered prayers for the king's cursed wolf, but none for the Omega girl thrown into its chamber. They all expected the same thing: a cold room, a silent floor, and proof that one more unwanted soul had failed to survive the madness beneath the crown. Frostvale Citadel stood above them like a mountain carved into a fortress, all black stone, narrow windows, and towers sharp enough to split the sky. Snow had fallen through the night, covering the outer courtyard in a clean white sheet that made the place look almost holy, if one did not know what waited below. Clara had known. Everyone in the Northern Territories knew. They called him the Mad King's Wolf, the beast that woke when the moon disappeared, the cursed creature no healer could soothe and no chain could fully command. Some said it had once been the spirit of King Adrian Blackthorn himself, the most feared alpha in the north, a ruler so cold that even powerful wolves lowered their eyes when he entered a room. Others said there was no king left at all, only a wolf-shaped nightmare wearing his shadow. Clara had heard those stories while scrubbing floors in Moonridge Pack, while carrying laundry through back halls, while pressing warm cloths to sick children's foreheads because no one else had the patience to sit with the weak. She had never imagined those stories would become the walls around her. 12 hours earlier, she had stood in the royal tribute hall with her wrists bound in silver cord, her plain blue dress still damp from the snow, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. The crowd had stared as if she were something already ruined. A stolen moonstone seal had been found in her basket, planted beneath folded linen she had carried for Lady Cassandra. Clara had tried to speak, but her voice had disappeared under the weight of laughter, accusation, and rank. A thief Omega deserves a beast's judgment, Elder Damon had declared, his voice ringing beneath the vaulted ceiling. And just like that, her life had been traded for convenience. Now morning had come. Captain Hale stopped before the final door, a slab of iron marked with old moon runes and scratches deep enough to hold frost. The air around it was strangely still. No growling, no thunder of paws, no wild sound from the darkness beyond. The council noticed it too. Their confidence thinned. Cassandra's smile faded. Hale lifted the key, but for one breath, he did not turn it. Something about the silence felt wrong, not empty, not peaceful, but watchful. Then the lock gave with a heavy click, and the door opened inward. Pale dawn spilled into the iron moon cell, touching the stone floor, the broken silver chains, the torn edge of Clara's sleeve, and Clara herself, sitting alive against the far wall, exhausted, shivering, but breathing. At her feet, curled between her and the door like a guardian carved from moonlight, slept the Mad King's Wolf. The sight stole every voice from the doorway. Clara Whitmore did not move at first, because she was not sure the morning was real. The stone behind her was bitterly cold, her fingers were stiff inside the torn cuffs of her sleeves, and every breath tasted like iron, frost, and candle smoke. Yet she was alive. She could feel the steady ache in her shoulders, the sting where the silver cord had rubbed her wrists, the soft weight of exhaustion pressing down on her bones. Alive meant pain. Alive meant mourning. Alive meant the monster beside her had chosen not to become what they feared. The wolf's massive head rested less than a foot from her boots, its silver-white fur rising and falling with slow, deep breaths. In sleep, it looked less like a curse and more like a creature that had carried too much darkness for too long. Clara remembered the way it had watched her in the night, not with mindless rage, but with a terrible, wounded awareness, as if some part of it had been begging from behind those winter-blue eyes. She remembered whispering because shouting would have broken her. She remembered sliding down the wall, making herself small, not to submit, but to show she would not threaten it. She remembered saying, "I know what it is like to be locked away for something you did not choose." Those words had not come from courage. They had come from memory. Before Frostvale, before the Iron Cell, before the council dressed cruelty in royal law, there had been Moonridge Pack, a narrow valley 3 days south where pine trees crowded the hills, and every roof carried snow from October to April. Clara had grown up in the servants' wing of the Vale estate, though no one there ever called it growing up. They called it being kept. Her mother had died when Clara was 12, leaving behind a wooden comb, a faded blue shawl, and a voice Clara could still hear whenever winter pressed too close to the windows. "Be gentle where the world is hard," her mother used to say. "The world will mistake it for weakness, but do not let it teach you to be cruel." Clara had tried to live by that. She fed the old hounds when the stable boys forgot. She patched gloves for children who mocked her the next morning. She sat beside fevered elders through long nights, while stronger wolves celebrated in the main hall. No one thanked her for it. Kindness, in Moonridge, was treated like a servant's habit, useful only when it stayed quiet. Her wolf was faint, too soft to impress anyone, her rank too low to protect her, her name too small to matter. Cassandra Vale had once laughed and called her a winter lamb, pretty enough to pity and too gentle to survive. The name had followed Clara through kitchens, corridors, and market roads until even strangers smiled when they heard it. But Clara had survived. Not loudly, not proudly. She survived in the way small flames survive under ash, hidden from the wind, waiting for one breath of air. And now, as the royal council stared into the cell expecting fear, Clara lifted her eyes from the sleeping wolf and understood something with a quiet certainty that warmed her more than dawn. They had mistaken gentleness for surrender. They had locked her in darkness, believing it would finally prove she was nothing. Instead, the darkness had recognized her. The memory of the tribute hall returned to Clara in fragments, each one bright and cold as frost on glass. It had been early evening when the royal procession arrived at Moonridge Pack, 6 black carriages rolling through the valley beneath banners marked with the silver wolf of Frostvale. Every family of rank had gathered in the great hall, dressed in velvet, pearls, and polished boots, their smiles sharp with ambition. The air smelled of pine garlands, hot cider, and the nervous sweetness of people pretending they were not afraid. No one admitted it, but the king's absence haunted every corner of the room. King Adrian Blackthorn had not come himself. He had not appeared in public for months. Instead, the royal council sent Captain Hale, 2 priests of the Northern Moon, and a sealed command wrapped in black ribbon. Moonridge owed loyalty. Moonridge owed tribute. Moonridge owed proof that it still stood with the crown. Clara had been ordered to serve at the back wall with the other household workers. Carrying trays she was careful not to spill, and keeping her eyes lowered whenever Cassandra Vale crossed the room. Cassandra had been radiant that night, pale gold hair pinned with tiny moonstones, white dress flowing around her as if winter itself had favored her. She moved through the hall as though she already belonged in a palace, accepting compliments, laughing softly, letting everyone imagine what she wanted them to imagine. Her father, Elder Damon Vale, watched with quiet satisfaction. He had spent weeks telling anyone who would listen that Cassandra possessed the grace to calm a wounded kingdom. Clara had no place in such conversations. She was meant to pass unseen, a shadow with a serving tray, a soft-footed reminder that some lives were built to support brighter ones. But then the moonstone seal vanished. It had rested on a velvet cushion beside the royal command, an old emblem said to open private passages in Frostvale Citadel. One moment it gleamed beneath the torchlight. The next, Lady Cassandra lifted a hand to her mouth and cried out with perfect surprise. The hall tightened around the sound. Servants were stopped. Doors were barred. Baskets were searched. Clara remembered the exact second her world changed. Captain Hale lifting the folded linen from her basket, the silver-blue stone rolling into his palm, the crowd breathing in as one. "That is not mine," Clara said, but her voice sounded small beneath the vaulted ceiling. Cassandra stepped forward, eyes wide, one gloved hand pressed to her heart. "Clara, why would you do this?" The softness in her tone was worse than anger. It made the lie sound like pity. Elder Damon did not wait for proof. He turned to the royal men with a face arranged in sorrow and disgust. "We have shown mercy to this girl for years. She has always been strange, always resentful of those above her. If she has insulted the crown, Moonridge will answer for it." Clara looked from face to face, searching for one person who knew her well enough to doubt the accusation. She found lowered eyes, tight mouths, silence dressed as safety. Then Captain Hale unfolded the sealed command and read the punishment reserved for treason against the royal house. A night in the Iron Moon cell, before the cursed wolf beneath Frostvale. The hall went so still Clara could hear wax dripping from the candles. Cassandra looked away, but not before Clara saw the flicker of triumph in her eyes. That was when Clara understood. They had not chosen her because they believed she was guilty. They had chosen her because she was easy to lose. When the silver cord closed around her wrists, she did not beg. She only looked at the people who had watched her mend their clothes, soothe their children, and carry warmth into their cold rooms. None of them stepped forward. Outside, snow began to fall. Inside, Elder Damon spoke the words that followed her all the way north. Let the beast judge what the court cannot. The road to Frostvale Citadel was longer than Clara expected, though the royal carriage moved fast enough to make the world beyond its narrow window blur into streaks of white, gray, and black pine. She sat alone on the rear bench with her bound hands folded in her lap, trying not to let the silver cord rub deeper into her skin. No one had offered her a cloak when they pulled her from Moonridge. No one had asked whether she was cold. She had been placed inside as one might place a broken chair in storage, useful only because someone had decided where it should be discarded. Across from her, Captain Hale rode in silence, his lantern swaying from a hook above his shoulder. He was not cruel to her, not in the way Elder Damon had been cruel, not in the way Cassandra had smiled with sugar over poison. But his restraint carried another kind of distance, the kind people used when they did not want a conscience to wake. Clara watched his face each time the carriage passed beneath moonlight. He was older than she had first thought, maybe 40, with silver beginning at his temples and a tiredness around his eyes that no rank could hide. After the first hour, when the last lights of Moonridge vanished behind the hills, he finally spoke. You should sleep while you can. Clara looked at him. Would you sleep? His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he would not answer. No, that honesty should have frightened her more, but instead it steadied something inside her. She turned back to the window. Snow tapped the glass in tiny, restless patterns. Beyond it, the northern territories opened into miles of wilderness, tall evergreens bent beneath winter, frozen creeks shining like thin ribbons under the moon, mountains rising ahead like sleeping giants. This was the land King Adrian Blackthorn had united, the land that still spoke his name with fear and reverence in equal measure. Clara had grown up on stories of him. Some came from traveling merchants who claimed he could silence an entire court with one glance. Some came from old soldiers who said he had ended border wars before Clara was born, not by destroying the pacts that opposed him, but by forcing them to kneel to one law. A harsh law, people said. A fair one, others whispered when no noble was near enough to hear. Before the curse, King Adrian had been called the Winter Crown, cold but steady, distant but just. Then came the Black Moon campaign 5 years ago, when something ancient was unearthed beyond the northern ridge. After that, the king stopped riding through the territories. The council began speaking in his place. The palace gates closed. The rumors changed. He was mad. He was cursed. He was no longer a man. Clara had never known which story to believe. Now she was being carried toward the truth with bound hands, and no one waiting to save her. Near midnight, the carriage climbed the final mountain road. The wheels rattled over stone, and the horses slowed as wind pressed hard against the doors. Frostvale Citadel appeared without warning at the edge of a cliff, vast and black against the snow, its towers piercing the clouds, its windows lit like watchful eyes. Clara felt her breath catch. The place did not look built. It looked awakened from the mountain itself. At the gates, guards in dark armor lowered their spears, then stepped aside when they saw Captain Hale's seal. No one looked at Clara for long. That frightened her more than staring would have. Inside the courtyard, the air was colder than outside, as if the stones had forgotten the sun. She was led down from the carriage, past statues of wolves half buried in snow, past silent soldiers, past doors tall enough for kings. Somewhere deep below, beneath the polished halls and royal banners, a sound moved through the citadel. It was not a roar. It was lower, heavier, almost like grief dragged across stone. Every guard stopped breathing for 1 second. Captain Hale closed his eyes. Clara understood then that whatever waited beneath Frostvale was not only feared. It was heard. It was carried in the bones of everyone who lived above it. The captain took her arm, not roughly, but firmly, and guided her toward a stairwell cut into the floor behind the old throne chamber. As they descended, the air changed. Warm candlelight gave way to blue shadow. The scent of pine vanished, replaced by cold stone, old smoke, and the sharp bite of silver. Clara counted the steps, because counting was easier than trembling. 20, 40, 70. At the bottom, a corridor stretched ahead, lined with runes that shimmered faintly under frost. Captain Hale stopped before the iron door. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before. Do not run. Do not scream. If he comes close, lower your eyes. Clara looked at the door, then at him. Has that saved anyone? The captain did not answer. Behind the iron, the darkness breathed. The iron door opened with a sound that seemed too small for the moment, a tired scrape of metal against stone, and yet Clara felt it move through her whole body. Captain Hale did not push her immediately. For one brief second, he stood beside her in the blue-lit corridor, his hand on the latch, his expression caught between duty and something almost like regret. Beyond the doorway, there was no torchlight, only a deep chamber washed in thin silver from a narrow opening high above. The moon had not yet vanished behind the clouds, and its light fell in a pale stripe across the floor, revealing old chains, frost on the walls, and marks carved into stone by years of restless pacing. Clara smelled cold first, then silver, then something wild beneath both, like pine forests after a storm. Her wolf, faint and quiet inside her, pressed back as if trying to hide behind her ribs. Step inside, Captain Hale said. His voice was steady, but his hand had tightened around the lantern. Clara looked at him once, hoping for any sign that this was still a test, still a cruel warning that could be taken back before the final moment. She found none, so she stepped over the threshold. The cold swallowed her at once. The chamber was larger than she expected, round like the inside of an ancient well, its ceiling lost in shadow, and its floor worn smooth except where silver runes had been set into the stone. At the far end, something moved. Not quickly, not fully, just the slow shift of a presence too large for the darkness to hide. Clara stopped breathing. Two eyes opened, bright winter blue, glowing from the far wall. The wolf rose. It was enormous, taller at the shoulder than any horse Clara had seen in Moonridge, its silver-white fur threaded with shadows where old magic clung to it like smoke. Heavy chains ran from iron rings in the wall to bands around its neck and forelegs, each band carved with runes that pulsed faintly as it moved. The wolf did not lunge. That frightened Clara more. It stared at her with a stillness that felt almost human, a terrible focus that stripped away every lie the council had told. It was not empty. It was not mindless. It was trapped inside a storm no one else wanted to understand. The door began to close behind her. Clara turned sharply, and for the first time fear broke through her silence. Captain. Hale paused without meeting her eyes. Please, she whispered, not because she believed pleading would save her, but because some part of her still needed one person to remember she was alive before the night took her. His face tightened. I am sorry. Then the door shut. The lock turned. The sound echoed through the chamber and disappeared into the wolf's breathing. Clara stood alone with the creature everyone feared, her silver-bound wrists trembling at her waist, her back inches from the sealed door. The wolf lowered its head. A low sound rolled from its chest. Not a roar, not exactly a warning, but a deep vibration that made frost loosen from the stones. Clara should have looked away. Hale had told her to lower her eyes. Every instinct she had learned in Moonridge told her to make herself smaller, softer, less noticeable. But the wolf's gaze held something she recognized too well, pain buried beneath anger because anger was the only thing others respected. Slowly, Clara sank to the floor, not from weakness, but because standing felt like a challenge. She folded her legs beneath her and placed her hands where it could see them. The silver cord had rubbed her skin raw, and a thin line of red marked her wrist. The wolf noticed. Its ears shifted forward. Its breathing changed. Clara felt the air grow heavier as it took one step, then another, the chain sliding across stone with a quiet, chilling drag. It came close enough for her to see the runes burning along the collar, close enough to see that beneath the moonlit fur, Its body trembled with each pulse of silver magic. Clara forgot her own fear for one breath. "They are hurting you," she said softly. The wolf froze. The chamber seemed to freeze with it. Clara's voice shook, but she did not take the words back. "That is why you sound like that. Not because you are cruel. Because it will not stop." The wolf's lips pulled back for a heartbeat, showing bright teeth, and Clara's pulse jumped hard in her throat. But she stayed still. She thought of every child she had soothed through fever, every frightened animal that had bitten before it trusted, every lonely elder who had snapped at her because pain had made kindness feel impossible. She had never been strong in the way Moonridge admired. She had no sharp command, no grand bloodline anyone honored, no power that could bend a room into silence. All she had was the stubborn, foolish refusal to stop seeing the wounded thing beneath the frightening one. The wolf came closer until its breath warmed the air above her hands. It smelled her wrist again, and a shudder moved through its massive frame. Clara lifted her bound hands just an inch. "I am not here to hurt you," she whispered. "I think they sent me because they thought I was too gentle to matter." The wolf's blue eyes narrowed, bright and ancient in the dark. Clara swallowed, tears gathering but not falling. "Maybe they were wrong about both of us." The wolf did not answer, but something in the chamber changed. The air, which had been tight and sharp with danger, loosened by the smallest degree, like a clenched hand forgetting how to close. Clara noticed because she had spent her whole life noticing small things. A child's fever easing before the mother believed it. An old dog lowering its head when the pain in its leg stopped burning. A lonely person pretending not to need comfort while leaning toward warmth anyway. The wolf was still close enough that one sudden movement could have ended everything. But Clara no longer felt only fear. She felt the rhythm of its breath, uneven and heavy. She saw the way the silver collar glowed brighter whenever its muscles tightened. She saw the dark runes beneath the metal pulse like something alive, answering not to the wolf, but to whatever spell had been forced into it. "It gets worse when you fight," she whispered. The wolf's ears flicked. Its eyes narrowed, not with anger, but attention. Clara drew in a slow breath, careful not to move too fast. "That is what they want, is it not? They want everyone upstairs to hear you struggle. They want them to believe you are only the curse." The words left her before she knew where they came from, but as soon as she said them, they felt true. The council did not need the king healed. A healed king would speak. A healed king would rule. A healed king might remember who had locked him away and taken his voice in the name of protection. The thought sent a colder fear through Clara than the wolf ever had. She looked at the collar again. The runes were not royal protection marks. She had seen old moon symbols in children's storybooks, stitched into blankets and carved over nursery doors. Those marks were meant to calm, to shield, to guide a spirit home. These were different. Jagged, twisted, wrong. "They told us you were mad," Clara said softly. "But I think someone needed you to look mad." The wolf stepped back, so suddenly the chains stirred across the floor. Its head swung toward the sealed door, and a low sound rose from its chest, filled not with wildness but recognition. Clara's heart beat faster. "You know," she breathed. The wolf looked at her again. For a moment, beneath the silver fur and moonlit eyes, Clara felt the presence of someone watching from far away, someone buried deep, exhausted but awake enough to hear. King Adrian Blackthorn. The name came into her mind with the weight of every whispered story. Winter Crown, Northern Alpha, Mad King. But the creature in front of her was not a title. It was a soul caught in a cage, surrounded by people who had decided a cage was easier than mercy. Clara lifted her bound wrists higher. "I cannot break this," she said, glancing at the cord around her own skin. "And I do not know how to break yours." Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to continue. "But I can stay quiet with you. I can help you breathe through it." The wolf watched her as if those words were stranger than any spell. Clara lowered her hands to her lap and began to hum. It was not a spell, not a prayer, not anything grand enough to belong in a palace. It was her mother's winter song, the one sung beside dim hearths when storms pushed against the shutters and the world felt too large for a child's heart. The melody was simple, soft, almost fragile. Clara had not sung it in years. At first, the chamber seemed to swallow the sound. Then the wolf's breathing shifted. The sharp edges of each inhale smoothed. Its shoulders lowered. The runes on the collar flickered, annoyed by the quiet, as if gentleness itself was something they could not understand. Clara kept humming. Her fear did not vanish. It sat beside her like a second shadow. But beneath it, something warmer began to bloom in her chest. Not power exactly, not the kind warriors bragged about, but a steady brightness that spread down her arms and gathered beneath the silver cord. The wolf saw it before she felt it. Its gaze dropped to her wrists. Clara stopped humming for half a breath. A pale light shimmered against her skin, faint as dawn behind clouds. The silver cord loosened. Not enough to fall, not enough to free her, but enough for Clara to understand that the night had not brought her here only to survive. The wolf lowered its massive head until its brow hovered inches from her hands, and in that impossible stillness, Clara whispered the only promise she could give. I will not leave you alone in this. The promise seemed to reach something deeper than sound. The wolf did not move for several long breaths, and Clara stayed exactly where she was, knees drawn beneath her, hands resting open in the dim glow between them. The chamber had gone so quiet that she could hear snow brushing against the narrow window high above, soft as fingertips across glass. Then the collar flared. The runes around the wolf's neck burned bright silver blue, and the creature recoiled with a sound that broke Clara's heart more than it frightened her. It was not rage. It was pain being forced to wear the mask of rage. The wolf turned away, chains pulling tight, shoulders shaking as the curse rolled through its body like a winter storm. Clara felt the old instinct to retreat, to press herself against the wall and become small enough to be forgotten. But she had been forgotten all her life, and forgetting had never saved anyone. Adrian, she whispered, using the name before fear could stop her. The wolf went still for one sharp instant. Clara's breath caught. That is your name, is it not? Not beast, not curse, not madness. Adrian. The chamber answered with a low, strained rumble. The wolf swung its head back toward her, eyes blazing, and the shadows around its fur stirred as if the name had cut through them. Clara rose slowly onto her knees. The silver cord slid loose around one wrist, and the pale light beneath her skin grew warmer, gathering in her palms. She did not understand it, but she trusted the feeling more than she trusted the counsel, more than she trusted the fear they had planted in her. My mother used to say names are doors, Clara said, her voice trembling but steady enough to hold. If someone is lost, call them like you expect them to come home. The wolf's breathing hitched. Clara moved 1 inch closer. Then another. The collar sparked again, and the wolf lowered its head as though fighting an invisible weight. Clara saw the place where the metal pressed too tightly, saw the twisted marks feeding on every struggle. She thought of Moonridge, of Cassandra's perfect smile, of Elder Damon's cold judgment, of all the people who had called her soft because cruelty was easier to admire than mercy. Her hands shook as she reached forward. I am going to touch the collar, she whispered. Not you. The thing hurting you. The wolf's eyes locked on hers. It did not lean away. It did not bow. It simply waited, and that waiting felt like trust offered with the last strength left. Clara placed both hands on the silver band. Cold shot through her fingers, sharp and stunning, but she did not pull back. The pale light in her palms brightened, flowing across the runes like sunrise over ice. The marks resisted at first, flickering angrily, then dimming one by one beneath her touch. Clara began to hum again, the winter song softer now, almost breathless. The wolf trembled. The chamber walls seemed to listen. Come back, she whispered between notes. Whoever they buried under this, come back. For one terrible moment, the shadows surged, and the wolf's head lifted above her, huge and moonlit, powerful enough to remind her how fragile she was. Clara did not close her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek, warm against the cold. I am not afraid of your soul, she said. The words landed like a key turning in a lock. The collar's light fractured, then softened. The chains slackened, not broken, but robbed of their cruel command. The wolf exhaled, a deep, shuddering breath that carried years of torment out into the dark. Then, slowly, impossibly, it lowered its massive head until its brow rested against Clara's glowing hands. Clara leaned forward and pressed her forehead gently to its fur. For the first time all night, the wolf did not sound like a curse. It sounded like someone finally allowed to sleep. Sleep did not come to Clara so much as take her gently from behind the eyes. One moment she was kneeling in the blue-dark chamber with her hands buried in moonlit fur, humming the last broken notes of her mother's winter song. The next, her body had folded against the wall, too tired to hold itself upright, while the great wolf lowered itself between her and the door. She felt the warmth of its breath near her boots, the slow rise and fall of its body, the strange quiet that filled the iron moon cell after hours of fear. For the first time since the silver cord closed around her wrists, Clara stopped fighting to stay awake. The chamber did not feel safe. Not exactly. The walls were still stone. The door was still locked. The runes still glimmered like watchful eyes. But the darkness no longer felt empty. It had a heartbeat now. It had a name. When dawn finally touched the high window, pale gold threaded through the last of the moonlight and spread across the floor. It found the broken edge of Clara's sleeve, the loosened silver cord near her hand, the collar around the wolf's neck now dull and quiet instead of burning. It found the faint mark on Clara's wrist, a crescent of soft silver just beneath the skin, pulsing once like a secret waking. Clara did not see it at first. She was drifting in that fragile place between dreams and pain, where memory and mourning blurred together. She thought she heard her mother's voice saying, "Gentle does not mean weak." Then the lock turned. The sound cracked through the chamber. Clara woke with a small gasp, every muscle tightening. The wolf woke faster. Its eyes opened, winter blue and clear, and in one smooth motion it rose in front of her, not lunging, not raging, but guarding. The door swung inward. Captain Hale stood on the threshold with his lantern raised. Behind him crowded the royal council, the priests, Elder Damon, and Cassandra in a white traveling cloak lined with fur, her face carefully arranged for sorrow she had expected to perform. No one spoke. The sight before them emptied the room of every prepared sentence. Clara was alive, pale and exhausted against the far wall. The wolf stood over her like a silver-white shield, one massive paw planted near the torn hem of her dress, its body blocking the doorway from reaching her. The old collar still circled its neck, but the runes had faded to ash-gray lines. The chains lay slack across the stone. Not broken, not conquered, simply refused. Captain Hale lowered the lantern by an inch. "Clara," he said, and her name sounded different in his mouth now, less like a record and more like a person. Elder Damon found his voice first. "Step away from it, girl." The wolf's head turned toward him. One low warning rolled through the chamber, controlled and cold, not wild. Damon went still. Cassandra took half a step back, her white cloak brushing the wall. Clara looked at them through the haze of exhaustion, and the humiliation of the previous night returned in a rush. The staring faces, the false evidence, the laughter, the silence of people who had known better and chosen safety. But she did not feel small now. She felt tired, shaken, and deeply alive. "He is not it," she said softly. The council stared at her, as if the Omega who should have begged had spoken a language above her station. Clara placed one hand against the wall and tried to rise. Her knees almost failed. Before she could fall, the wolf shifted closer, lowering its shoulder until she could steady herself against its fur. A murmur broke through the doorway, spreading from guard to priest to noble like fire catching dry pine. The beast had not spared her by accident. It was helping her stand. Clara's hand trembled against the wolf's shoulder, but the creature remained still beneath her touch. In the new light, the silver crescent on her wrist glowed once more. Captain Hale saw it. So did one of the priests, whose face went white with recognition. "The Luna mark," he whispered. The words passed through the chamber, and every gaze dropped to Clara's hand. Cassandra's composure shattered into disbelief. Elder Damon opened his mouth, but no command came out. The wolf lifted its head, eyes fixed on the council, and for the first time since Clara had entered Frostvale, the fear in the room no longer belonged to her. The whispered words changed the chamber more completely than any command could have. The Luna mark. Clara had heard of it only in old stories told beside kitchen fires, the kind of stories servants repeated when winter storms trapped them indoors and children wanted proof that the moon still cared about forgotten people. A silver crescent appearing on the wrist of the one soul able to reach a crowned wolf through darkness. A sign not of rank, not of beauty, not of bloodline, but of recognition. Clara stared at her own hand as if it belonged to someone else. "That is impossible," Cassandra said, her voice thin and sharp. She is a servant. She stole from the crown. She should not even be standing. The wolf's gaze cut to her, and Cassandra fell silent so quickly that the last words seemed to freeze in the air. Then the chamber filled with light. It began beneath the wolf's fur, a soft silver glow pulsing from the quieted collar, spreading across its shoulders, down its spine, through the shadows tangled in its coat. Clara felt the warmth of it under her palm. Not heat, not fire. Something steadier, something waking. The wolf lowered its head once, as if listening to a call only it could hear, and the air around it shimmered like moonlight on snow. Captain Hale stepped back, pulling the others with him. The old priests bowed their heads. Clara should have been afraid, but she could not look away. The great silver-white shape folded into light, not violently, not suddenly, but like a storm choosing at last to become sky. Fur became shadow, shadow became breath, and breath became a man kneeling on one knee before her in the dawn-washed cell. King Adrian Blackthorn lifted his head. He was taller than any man in the doorway, even while kneeling, broad-shouldered beneath the torn remains of dark royal cloth, his pale skin marked by the strain of the curse, but unbroken by it. His face was all sharp northern angles, high cheekbones, strong jaw, black hair falling loose around eyes the exact winter blue Clara had seen in the wolf. Cold eyes, yes, but no longer empty. They held exhaustion, fury carefully leashed, and something gentler that made Clara's breath catch. For a moment, no one moved. Then every guard in the corridor dropped to one knee. Captain Hale followed, his face pale with awe and shame. The council hesitated only long enough for Adrian's gaze to find them. Then they bowed too, all except Cassandra and Elder Damon, who seemed unable to understand that the world had shifted without asking their permission. Adrian rose slowly. The chains slid from his arms and fell harmlessly to the stone, their runes dark. He took one step toward Clara, then stopped, giving her the choice to step back. That small restraint undid her more than any grand gesture could have. Last night, everyone had pushed, dragged, judged, and locked. The king simply waited. Clara's fingers curled around the torn edge of her sleeve. "Your Majesty," she whispered. Adrian's expression tightened at the title, as if it belonged to the cold room above, not the truth between them. "Adrian," he said, his voice rough from long silence. "You called me Adrian when no one else dared call me anything but monster." Elder Damon recovered enough to speak. "Your Majesty, this girl deceived the crown. The seal was found in her basket. Moonridge acted only to protect royal law." Adrian did not look away from Clara. "No," he said quietly. "Moonridge acted to protect its own ambition." The words were soft, but they carried through the chamber with the weight of thunder held inside ice. Captain Hale bowed his head lower. One of the priests lifted the moonstone seal from his robe, its surface now glowing in answer to Clara's mark. "The seal responds to her," he said. "It was never stolen by her hand. It was planted near her because the old magic would wake only in her presence." Cassandra's face drained of color. Clara felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for how easily they had tried to spend her life. Adrian turned then, his gaze sweeping over the council, the nobles, the people who had come to witness her end. "You locked an innocent Omega in my darkness," he said. "And she did what none of you could do. She saw the man beneath the curse." He removed his black cloak from a nearby guard's arm and placed it gently around Clara's shoulders, shielding her from the cold without trapping her beneath it. Then he faced the doorway, and every person there seemed to hold their breath. "Clara Whitmore is not a prisoner. She is not a servant to be discarded. She is under my protection, by royal command, and by the moon's own witness." Clara looked up at him, at the king who had been called mad because others feared his return, and saw not rescue alone, but recognition. Adrian lowered his voice, so only she could hear the first part, though the final words carried to every corner of the cell. "You stayed when the world expected you to run. Now let me stand where no one stood for you." His eyes lifted to the council, winter-bright and clear. "Bring the throne hall to order. At sunrise, the North will learn its king has awakened."